opportunity to start thinking about bigger issues when we take a bigger overview. And that's actually called the overlook effect. And many astronauts have reported it, that when you go into space, you come back with a different perspective. Some people have a sense of great oneness with the cosmos. Others find a sense of purpose behind everything. Others are struck by the fact that you can't see borders in most cases in space. One of the few borders you can see in space is between North and South Korea. All the lights are on the south side. But you don't see national boundaries. You know, you wonder why people squabble over them. Others have a sense of oneness with everything. So there we are, the 6 of us up at Devon Island. Yusuke from Japan, Paul from the US, Anastasia from Russia, Nishri from India, Alex from France, and myself from Canberra. Only Christian in the group. How does that work out? Well, it's the same as being the only Christian in your family or the only Christian at work, but you're not. Right? Life goes on. You don't sort of sit there and think, how am I going to evangelise everyone or anything like that. You know, you've got to work together as a team. Opportunities come up to talk about, you know, serious stuff. You take them, but you know, this is my family. I mean, they're more than just friends now. You know, they are a family. We've spent 3, 4, 5 months, you know, living and working with these people in a simulation. They are really quite special. That's the station in Utah, the upper deck. Very comfortable lounge, kitchen. Each have individual cabins behind here. This is for sort of like a mezzanine or a loft, looking down the stairs down to the lower deck. Oh, you live together, you work together, you socialise together, and generally have a pretty good time. Argue occasionally, and occasionally talk about the serious stuff. There's the station again. Well, that's a good example of an image that inspires the overlook effect. This is Saturn, taken by the Cassini spacecraft. I like Saturn, as Rob mentioned. This is an unusual view of Saturn. This is actually Saturn eclipsing the Sun. So all the rings of Saturn, including the ones you don't normally see, are backlit by the Sun. And if you look at that image at full resolution, there's a tiny little pale blue dot in there, which is home. Everybody who's ever lived is in that tiny little dot. So as people contemplate the tiny blue dot and perhaps where we might go, various quotes are worth considering. This is from a pioneer French aviator talking about adventure. So if you want to build a ship, you don't drum up people to collect the wood and don't assign them tasks and work, but rather to teach them to long for the immensity of the sea. And part of what I'm doing today is not to go into the details of how we might want to go to Mars, but perhaps instill a vision of what we might learn when we go there and what we might experience. My namesake, Arthur Clarke, said, whether we become a multi-planet species will be decided amidst the vast plains, rugged canyons and lofty mountains of Mars. A lot of speculative fiction about colony settlements on Mars, nations on Mars, maybe. But we'll find out whether or not it's possible only by going. Dave Scott, commander of the Apollo 15 mission. As the lead up to the mission, quite late in the phase, they still had not decided where they're going to go. There were 2 main candidates, a very boring site, interesting only to geochemists, called Marius Hills, and another one called Hadley Apennine, which had mountains 4,000 metres high. Very risky, very difficult to get to. And at the end of the day, when they were nutting this out, he hadn't said anything, he came up with this statement, plumping for Hadley Apennines. I believe there's something to be said for exploring beautiful places. It's good for the spirit. So there they went. another response to going to space. Al Bean, who passed away last year, perhaps earlier this year, Apollo 12, lunar module pilot, very good artist, and this is some of his artwork inspired by his trip to the moon. This is dedicated to the lunar module pilot Apollo 15, who Jim Irwin, who later became an evangelist. This one, he and Pete Conrad running across the lunar surface. Were we gazelles or were we giraffes? A sense of oneness with the universe and reaching out. Perhaps the most famous example of the overlook effect was Earthrise photo and the reading of the first few verses of Genesis by the Apollo 11 crew. And there's actually several Earthrise photos, so they came around the back side of the moon. This is one of them. Well done. Less well known, Apollo 11. Buzz Aldrin, Presbyterian. He wanted to do something significant like the Genesis reading, but NASA had been sued by Madeleine O'Hare, a rather cranky atheist, for violating the separation of church and state. And so he did something a bit more private, a bit more symbolic. Took a little flask of wine, a chalice, and a wafer, and he read these two passages of scripture. Jesus said, I am the vine, and also from Psalm 8, when I consider the heavens, the moon and the stars which you have made, what is man that you remember him? And then he took communion on the moon. And of course, the two plaques that were left on the moon. Apollo 15, we came in peace for all mankind. And the Apollo 17 one, which I can't quite read, was a small screen, but Gene Cernan, the mission commander, said, we leave as we came, and God willing we shall return with peace and hope for all mankind. And these are just fighter jobs, right? But going to space, seeing the Earth from the moon, seeing the universe, inspired something from the new perspective. More recent examples, space station. This is where cultural differences come in. This is the US segment. There's national flags, there's university sports teams, and so on. The Russian segment, there's Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, the father of spaceflight. Yuri Gagarin just behind this guy's head. I don't know who that fellow is. Russian flag, model of a space shuttle. But there's a crucifix. There's icons. So as we circle the Earth every 90 or so minutes, this is going overhead. And people are reflecting on the spiritual dimension when they see this and when they look out at the world. Interesting, the Russian space program is far less self-conscious about having this as a visible part of what they do. And then there's a woman in Adelaide, space historian, space archaeologist, she calls herself, actually tracks how this has changed, how different things come and go with different crews, reflecting the different crews' perspectives. Overlook effect. That's Centaurus A, a very active galaxy. If you go to Arkarula at the right and use their telescopes there, which I recommend, you can actually see this with the naked eye. It's one of the most furthest objects that, not with the naked eye, but telescopes, one of the furthest objects, many millions of light years away, that we can see. Psalm 8, Yahweh our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You set your glory in the heavens. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is mankind that you're mindful of them? Human beings, you care for them. Yahweh our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. Questions?
John, with the crew, the people you were working with on those simulations,
yeah,
What do you think would be the makeup of the team if it actually went to Mars?
A lot of thought has gone into that. Obviously, there are key skills you want. So you want people who are really good at engineering, not just specialists, but people who can actually work all the systems. So on the International Space Station, maintenance of life support, the ability to carry out EVAs, extravehicular activities, and to operate the robotic arm, which is one of the main external tools on the International Space Station. On Mars, it'll be similar. You'll want to be able to be top at keeping life support going and doing the EVAs on the surface. You want a geologist. I mean, geologists are why you go. You don't go there to give exercise to engineers. You go there to study the planet. So a geologist, but not just your average garden variety geologist. The one who's also really practical at fixing stuff. Perhaps a biologist, an astrobiologist, which is probably more of a speciality for a geologist to do that sort of work. Certainly, if the crew is large enough, a medical doctor. But again, someone who's not, because people won't get sick, hopefully they won't get injured. They'll be able to do their own biomedical research, but you'd have that person there with that skill set in an emergency. So you've got 4 to 6 people, perhaps 7 or 8 different skills, and you've got to have people that do all of them. What's something else? They've got to be people who can get on really, really well. They'll be like family. And this is why people will spend years working together, choosing who they want to go. They'll be like kids at the schoolyard, picking their team. You don't get some person to do it. People say, well, anonymously, I'd rather go with him and her and maybe him, but definitely not so-and-so. And you end up with self-selected teams who know they can work together. So, with the crew we had at where are we? Okay, well, let's say that one. Most people, everybody knew at least one other person in the crew before. So I knew Anushri from Ladakh. She was on the Ladakh trip. I knew Annalie because we're both directors of the Mars Society. Anastasia, Jon Clarke from Canada, and Alex and Yusuke had all been on previous crews to NDRS as well. So we all knew at least one other person, and we were selected by someone who knew us well and thought that we'd make a good crew, and she was right.
So you've got your ticket booked, have you?
I wish. I've got some of the skills. I think I can get on pretty well with people under difficult conditions. I've certainly got the geological side of things. I'm probably not as practical as I should be. I mean, if the car breaks down, I sort of show a leg and wait for NRMA to turn up. But I can change a tyre.
We can help you out with that. Yeah.
That's right. Well, someone like you would be perfect. And 60 is. You both of us are 60. You let that slip earlier. Sort of the top end of the prime age. You're not going to send people in their 20s. You're going to send people in their 40s and 50s. 30s, 40s, 50s to go to Mars. The oldest person on the International Space Station today is 61. So that's the sort of thing. Yeah, not like Matt Damon, young and handsome, all that sort of thing. But grumpy old people like us. Yeah.
How long does it take to get to Mars, and how much would it cost?
Getting there, 6 months. So 6 months there, 18 months on the surface, 6 months back. Here's something to think about. It took it took the first fleet 8 months to get to Australia in 1788. So in terms of travel time, Australia was Mars 200 years ago, 200 a bit years ago. How much would it cost is the billion-dollar question. We don't know. It really depends on the mission design, the mission architecture, how much already existing technology you can use, or whether you have to design and build it all from scratch. It'll probably be of the scale of, say, the Apollo project in terms of cost, spread over 10 years to design, build it, test it, and then carry out a sequence of missions, because you won't want to do just one, you want to do a sequence of them, preferably perpetuity. So Apollo project, International Space Station, a lot cheaper than wars in Afghanistan or Iraq. Probably international. There's another thing with the crew. Like us, you'd have people from the US, from Europe, from Russia, hopefully China and India as well, maybe Japan. And international crews provided sort of social variety and different perspectives on problems that really make these things work. Yeah?
I was wondering, with all these people coming together, who are you doing it for? Like, are there a number of institutions you're working for? Or is there just one big umbrella like NASA?
Well, I'd like to hope that it'd be an international consortium, like the International Space Station, where there is a governing...
So meaning what you're doing now is you're going to all these different places.
Me personally, sorry. This is all done by the Mars Society in conjunction with other Mars Societies in Australia. So there's the US Mars Society, the Japanese Mars Society, there's a branch opened up in India, and all the people involved were long-standing members of the Mars Society.
So all this data that you're collecting,
Yep.
does the Mars Society just keep it to themselves, or does NASA want to find out a bit more about it?
Well, the idea is we publish it, and in the peer-reviewed scientific literature. So I had a paper come out a few weeks ago on some of the features in Devon Crater, on the crater on Devon Island, Horton Crater. I'm also working on a paper on the inverted river channels in Utah. And when I get them out of the way, I've already published a paper on the operational aspects, the EVA cycle and lessons from that. And then I'm going to write up some stuff from the dark. So, yeah, we publish this stuff, and then anyone can use it. And it does get cited. NASA uses these facilities. IBMP from Russia uses these facilities. The European Space Agency uses them. So there are facilities available for hire.
But the facilities have been developed by the Mars Society.
Sorry,
But the facilities have been developed.
the facility is owned by the Mars Society. It's built around the Mars Direct architecture, which I showed earlier. But anybody can use that, and the results can be applicable to other architectures and to lunar missions as well. I mean, living and working on the moon isn't going to be too different to living and working on Mars in many ways. In some ways, very different, but overall, fairly similar.
How far away is Mars and Sol to take communications?
Well, 6 months, it varies enormously. So, for example, Mars is on one side of the Sun and Earth is on the other, a long way apart. The orbits, Mars is just over 1.5 times further than the Sun from Earth. So, when, I can never remember in kilometres, the Sun is 93 million miles from Earth. You multiply that by 1.5, so what's that? 130 million miles for Mars, and then another 90 odd million miles, so over 200 million miles apart. When they're close, when they are close together, it's only about 40 million miles. In the end, it's time. Just like Australia was 8 months from Britain in 1788. It's time that matters. So 6 months, 6 months away. Standard rotation on the International Space Station is 6 months. So we're already, if you'd like, doing journey to Mars on a routine basis on the International Space Station. There are more than 30 people who have spent as much time in space as you would on a Mars mission. Yeah.
How far out do you think is the first mission to Mars?
Well, if you put our minds to it, we could be there in 10 years. If we don't put our minds in it, we could be still faffing around in Earth orbit in 100 years' time. That's the real challenge, not the engineering issues, not the medical issues, it's the political will. We've got to want to go. We've got to say we've had enough time frittling around with robots, and they're useful but incredibly limited capabilities. We want to do this properly. Yeah, Jeff.
Do you think it would be a lot technically and logistically easier if you were able to send people who didn't necessarily want to come back, so you didn't have to have a return mission?
Well, people suggest that.
Yeah.
I think there's several disadvantages to that. First of all, you want to bring the rocks back.
Yeah.
Because the sort of instruments you take to Mars, even though you might have a ton of equipment, literally a ton of equipment on board, to analyse it, it'll still be vastly inferior to the range of instruments you could do. You could run those samples through on Earth. And they'll be on Earth in perpetuity. I mean, there's people studying lunar rocks now with instruments like synchrotrons and all the rest, which weren't even conceived as analytical instruments back in the Apollo days. So the samples are coming back, you might as well bring the people. We also don't know the long-term effects of living on Mars are as yet. One of the reasons I want to go is to see whether people can live their lives out on Mars. But until that happens, probably should bring them back. And most people, you know, if they go, eventually would want to come back anyway. There might be a few who want to stay, but most people want to come back and talk to their grandkids about them and bore them.
I read a book recently called The Heart of the Sun. It's a book about the sun.
Sorry, say that again?
The Heart of the Sun.
Yeah.
And they say that first people who go to Mars and way than us will lose 80 to 40% of their intelligence due to cosmic rays.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen those studies.
You're going to have to find a way to overcome protected by the magnetic field.
Yeah. I've seen those studies. They're very popular, they're very widely quoted, so I'm glad some people here have seen them. The kindest thing I can say about them is they're voodoo science. I can say there's several reasons. First of all, those long-suffering rodents, mice and rats, that were irradiated in a beamline from a nuclear reactor, were given many, many times the dose of what people would receive on a round trip to Mars, something like the equivalent of 10 or 12 round trips to Mars. And they were given that not over a 2.5-year period, but in a matter of minutes. Oh, surprise, they've got impaired cognition. So I have no idea how that research passed funding review, ethical review, because we can do all sorts of horrible things to rats and mice in the laboratory, but it's got to give useful results for humans. And these results are no good at all. And then how that, when published, it passed peer review. Because there's so many bad arguments being used. They didn't even use the right units to measure the radiation. But this work somehow still keeps going, and the media keeps going, and people think, well, you know, we're going to have these issues. People on the International Space Station, you know, have had equivalent or greater doses of people going to Mars, and they're still fine. They're not gaga or anything. But yeah, I mean, nonetheless, radiation is an issue. It's a hazard, and like all hazards, we manage them until the risk is within an acceptable level. I mean, the hazard of space is the thing will depressurize and you'll all die. How do we manage that? We build in double pressure hulls. We make sure that there's multiple airtight compartments, so if one gets ruptured, you can go to the other. You know, we test them extensively and so on. So there are hazards like radiation, like exposure to zero gravity, like engineering hazards, but we work on the risks so that it becomes acceptable. I mean, 1 in every 50 astronauts dies on a mission. Or not quite 1 in every 50 astronauts, better word, 1 in every 50 missions ends up killing someone. So the biggest chance of you're an astronaut dying is not from radiation or zero gravity or 4-armed Martian aliens. It's from blowing up on a launch pad or breaking up in a re-entry. Everybody who's died on a space mission has either been launched or returned. That's the dangerous part.
So cosmic rays aren't a problem?
They are a hazard, but they can be kept to a safe level. So there are parts of the world, on the surface of Mars, you would get unshielded, not living in a habitat which has got shielding, but unshielded, skinny dipping on Mars without a spacesuit, you'd get about 230 millisieverts of radiation a year. There's a place in Iran, a tourist resort on the coast of the Caspian Sea, where the people who live there get 400 millisieverts of radiation a year. There's a tourist resort in Brazil, looks like the Gold Coast, skyscrapers, where people would get almost 800 millisieverts of radiation a year. And people live there their entire lives, and without obvious ill effect. So this is why I have problems with some of these radiation studies, because, and perhaps I'm getting too much detail here for tonight, but there are assumptions in those studies of The health consequences being linear with ever smaller doses. That doesn't seem to hold true. And they also assume that there's no such thing as a minimum safe dose. And again, that doesn't seem to be the case. From these studies of high radiation environments in France, in Norway, as well as in Iran and Brazil, and also India. But it's a great question. Thank you. Yeah.
What's the source of the radiation from those two places you go, for example? Is that just the sun?
These ones on Earth. Radioactive minerals in rocks, uranium, thorium, potassium. Sometimes groundwater leaches out radium. Uranium and thorium give off radon, which can be a problem if people have basements underneath their house. It can pool, and that's that's the main source. I mean, there are the beach in Brazil. That's heavy mineral sands in the beach, uranium and thorium minerals. But Canberra, we get slightly higher than average radiation, partly because we're at 800 odd metres above sea level, so we get more cosmic rays. And most of the rocks around Canberra are quite high in potassium. You eat a banana, you're ingesting a certain low-level dose of radiation from the radioactive potassium. You need more bananas. Yeah.
So talking about food, I mean, if you're up there for, 6 months there, 18 months on the Mars, and then 6 months come back, so 2.5 years, 2.5 years. So what are you eating all that time, and how do you project the health impacts of that?
Well, we have food that can be preserved long term. So on our trip, I think it's all the doomsday preppers in the US, but you get an amazing range of freeze-dried vegetables and things in the US, very cheaply. It's cheap as fresh vegetables. Every vegetable you can imagine being freeze-dried, including some that probably shouldn't, like lettuce. So we lived on that. We had Japanese space food, which was, again, freeze-dried. Just added hot water, like they do on the space station, it rehydrates, so that was quite nice. We had Russian space food, which was excellent. Things like preserved meats in aspic and so on. All sorts of soups in toothpaste tubes, borscht and other types of soup, very nice. And all sorts of things, cottage cheese and different fruit mixed in with it. So apparently every country that sends its people to the International Space Station has its own way of doing food, and there's a lot of horse trading going around. The French bread is very nice, and they'll trade French bread for Russian cottage cheese and for I don't know, whatever the ice cream on the American one. So we have all of these foods being prepared for the space station. That'll be that sort of diet. I remember at the end of the Utah thing, after 3 months of living on this stuff, Annalie and I, we drove 3 hours to pick up the hire vehicle so everybody could pull out the next day, and we had a steak and salad, and my goodness, they tasted good.
I can believe it.
Yeah.
It took 8 months to get out to Australia in the first voyage.
Yeah.
And with that came a lot of noxious bleeds and actually and unwanted things.
Yeah.
So you thought that green water could take to Mars and not have an impact?
Such as?
I don't know.
Yeah. So you think or pests and so on, or? Well, if you're talking about biological hazards, there are standards of planetary protection to make sure we don't introduce the equivalent of rabbits to Mars or whatever. Fortunately, the surface of Mars is very hostile. To start with, it's low pressure. In large areas of Mars, water cannot be liquid. In some areas it can. So terrestrial life won't survive there because the pressure is so low. It's often really cold. There's no available liquid water. On top of that, the surface is flooded by hard ultraviolet. So ultraviolet, the long wave ultraviolet, which gives you skin tan. There's medium wave ultraviolet, UVB, which gives you skin cancer. And then beyond that, there's UVC, which is what hospitals use for sterilising. And that is extremely destructive to life as we know it. And so the surface, any bug that hops out of your spacecraft onto the surface of Mars is probably going to die horribly, very, very quickly.
I wasn't suggesting something we know. I was suggesting more. It could be some wicked thing which I don't know.
Yeah, look, these are possibilities. I keep